Chapter 5 The Bridge of Khazad-dûm. The company of the Ring stood silent beside the tomb of Balin. Frodo thought of Bilbo and his long friendship with the dwarf, and of Balin's visit to the Shire long ago. In that dusty chamber in the mountains it seemed 1,000 years ago, and on the other side of the world. At length they stirred and looked up, and began to search for anything that would give them tidings of Balin's fate, or show what had become of his folk. There was another smaller door on the other side of the chamber, under the shaft. By both the doors, they could now see that many bones were lying, and among them were broken swords and axe heads, and cloven shields and helms. Some of the swords were crooked, orc scimitars, with blackened blades. There were many recesses cut in the rock of the walls, and in them were large iron-bound chests of wood. All had been broken and plundered. But beside the shattered lid of one, there lay the remains of a book. It had been slashed and stabbed and partly burned, and it was so stained with black and other dark marks like old blood that little of it could be read. Gandalf lifted it carefully, but the leaves cracked and broke as he lay it on the slab. He pored over it for some time without speaking. Frodo and Gimli, standing at his side, could see, as he gingerly turned the leaves, that they were written by many different hands, in runes, both of Moria and of Dale, and here and there in Elvish script. At last, Gandalf looked up. "It seems to be a record of the fortunes of Balin's folk," he said. "I guess that it began with the coming to Dimril Dale nigh on 30 years ago. The pages seem to have numbers referring to the years after their arrival. The top page is marked 1, 3, so at least 2 are missing from the beginning. Listen to this. We drove out orcs from the great gate and guard..." I think the next word is blurred and burned, probably room. "We slew many in the bright, I think, sun in the dale. Floey was killed by an arrow. He slew the great..." Then there is a blur, followed by "Floey under grass near Miramir." The next line or two I cannot read. Then comes, "We have taken the 21st hall of North End to dwell in. There is..." I cannot read what. "A shaft is mentioned. Then Balin has set up his seat in the chamber of Mazarbul." "The Chamber of Records," said Gimli. "I guess that is where we now stand." "Well, I can read no more for a long way," said Gandalf, "except the word gold and Durin's axe and something helm. Then Balin is now Lord of Moria. That seems to end a chapter. After some stars, another hand begins, and I can see, we found true silver, and later the word well forged. And then something... I have it. Mithril. And the last 2 lines. Oin to seek for the upper armories of Third Deep. Something go westward, a blur, to Holland Gate." Gandalf paused and set a few leaves aside. "There are several pages of the same sort, rather hastily written and much damaged," he said. "But I can make little of them in this light. Now, there must be a number of leaves missing, because they begin to be numbered 5, the 5th year of the colony, I suppose. Let me see. No, they are too cut and stained. I cannot read them. We might do better in the sunlight. Wait, here is something. A large, bold hand using an Elvish script." "That would be Ori's hand," said Gimli, looking over the wizard's arm. "He could write well and speedily, and often use the elvish characters." "I fear he had ill tidings to record in a fair hand," said Gandalf. "The first clear word is sorrow, but the rest of the line is lost unless it ends in estre. Yes, it must be yestre, followed by day being the 10th of November. Balin, Lord of Moria, fell in Dimril Dale. He went alone to look in Miramir. An orc shot him from behind a stone. We slew the orc, but many more up from east up the Silverlode." The remainder of the page is so blurred that I can hardly make anything out, but I think I can read, "We have barred the gates," and then "can hold them long if," and then perhaps "horrible" and "suffer." Poor Balin. He seems to have kept the title that he took for less than 5 years. I wonder what happened afterwards, but there is no time to puzzle out the last few pages. Here is the last page of all. He paused and sighed. "It is a grim reading," he said. "I fear their end was cruel. Listen. We cannot get out. We cannot get out. They have taken the bridge and second hall. Frar and Loni and Nali fell there." Then there are 4 lines smeared, so I can only read "went 5 days ago." The last lines run, "The pool is up to the wall at Westgate. The watcher in the water took Owen. We cannot get out. The end comes." And then drums. Drums in the deep. I wonder what that means. The last thing written is in a trailing scrawl of elf letters. They are coming. There is nothing more. Gandalf paused and stood in silent thought. A sudden dread and a horror of the chamber fell on the company. "We cannot get out," muttered Gimli. "It was well for us that the pool had sunk a little, and that the watcher was sleeping down at the southern end." Gandalf raised his head and looked around. "They seem to have made a last stand by both doors," he said. "But there were not many left by that time. So ended the attempt to retake Moria. It was valiant, but foolish. The time is not yet come. Now, I fear, we must say farewell to Balin, son of Fundin. Here he must lie in the halls of his father. We will take this book, the Book of Mazarbul, and look at it more closely later. You had better keep it, Gimli, and take it back to Dain, if you get a chance. It will interest him, though it will grieve him deeply. Come, let us go. The morning is passing." "Which way shall we go?" asked Boromir. "Back to the hall," answered Gandalf. "But our visit to this room has not been in vain. I now know where we are. This must be, as Gimli says, the chamber of Mazarbul, and the hall must be the 21st of the north end. Therefore, we should leave by the eastern arch of the hall, and bear right and south, and go downwards. The 21st hall should be on the 7th level, that is, 6 above the level of the gates. Come now, back to the hall." Gandalf had hardly spoken these words when there came a great noise. A rolling boom that seemed to come from depths far below and to tremble in the stone at their feet. They sprang towards the door in alarm. Doom, doom, it rolled again, as if huge hands were turning the very caverns of Moria into a vast drum. Then there came an echoing blast. A great horn was blown in the hall, and answering horns and harsh cries were heard farther off. There was a hurrying sound of many feet. They are coming, cried Legolas. We cannot get out, said Gimli. Trapped, cried Gandalf. Why did I delay? Here we are caught, just as they were before. But I was not here then. We will see what doom, doom, came the drumbeat, and the walls shook. Slam the doors and wedge them, shouted Aragorn. And keep your packs on as long as you can. We may get a chance to cut our way out yet. No, said Gandalf. We must not get shut in. Keep the east door ajar. We will go that way if we get a chance. Another harsh horn call and shrill cries rang out. Feet were coming down the corridor. There was a ring and clatter as the company drew their swords. Glamring shone with a pale light, and Sting glinted at the edges. Boromir set his shoulder against the western door. Wait a moment, don't close it yet, said Gandalf. He sprang forward to Boromir's side and drew himself up to his full height. Who comes hither to disturb the rest of Balin, Lord of Moria? He cried in a loud voice. There was a rush of hoarse laughter, like the fall of sliding stones into a pit. Amid the clamour, a deep voice was raised in command. Doom, boom, doom, went the drums in the deep. With a quick movement, Gandalf stepped before the narrow opening of the door and thrust forward his staff. There was a dazzling flash that lit the chamber and the passage outside. For an instant, the wizard looked out. Arrows whined and whistled down the corridor as he sprang back. There are orcs, very many of them, he said, and some are large and evil, black uruks of Mordor. For the moment, they are hanging back, but there is something else there. A great cave troll, I think, or more than one. There is no hope of escape that way. And no hope at all if they come the other door as well, said Boromir. There is no sound out here yet, said Aragorn, who was standing by the eastern door listening. The passage on this side plunges straight down a stair. It plainly does not lead back towards the hall, but it is no good flying blindly this way with the pursuit just behind. We cannot block the door. Its key is gone and the lock is broken, and it opens inwards. We must do something to delay their enemy first. We will make them fear the chamber of Mazalbul, he said grimly, feeling the edge of his sword, Andúril. Heavy feet were heard in the corridor. Boromir flung himself against the door and heaved to it. Then he wedged it with broken sword blades and splinters of wood. The company retreated to the other side of the chamber, but they had no chance to fly yet. There was a blow on the door that made it quiver, and then it began to grind slowly open, driving back the wedges. A huge arm and shoulder with a dark skin of greenish scales was thrust through the widening gap. Then a great, flat, toeless foot was forced through below. There was a dead silence outside. Boromir leaped forward and hewed at the arm with all his might, but his sword rang, glanced aside, and fell from his shaken hand. The blade was notched. Suddenly, and to his own surprise, Frodo felt a hot wrath blaze up in his heart. The Shire! He cried. Swinging beside Boromir, he stood and stabbed with Sting at the hideous foot. There was a bellow, and the foot jerked back, nearly wrenching Sting from Frodo's arm. Black drops dripped from the blade and smoked on the floor. Boromir hurled himself against the door and slammed it again. One for the Shire, cried Aragorn. The hobbit's bite is deep, You have a good blade, Frodo, son of Drogo. There was a crash on the door, followed by crash after crash. Rams and hammers were beating against it. It cracked and staggered back, and the opening grew suddenly wide. Arrows came whistling in and struck the northern wall and fell harmlessly to the floor. There was a horn blast and a rush of feet, and orcs, one after the other, leaped into the chamber. How many there were, the company could not count. The affray was sharp, but the orcs were dismayed by the fierceness of the defence. Legolas shot two through the throat. Gimli hewed the legs from under another that had sprung up on Balin's tomb. Boromir and Aragorn slew men. When 13 had fallen, the rest fled shrieking, leaving the defenders unharmed, except for Sam, who had a scratch along the scalp. A quick duck had saved him, and he had felled his orc, a sturdy thrust with his barrow blade. A fire was smouldering in his brown eyes that would have made Ted Sandyman step backwards if he had seen it. "Now is the time," cried Gandalf. "Let us go, before the troll returns." But even as they retreated, and before Pippin and Merry had reached the stair outside, a huge orc chieftain, almost man-high, clad in black mail from head to foot, leaped into the chamber. Behind him, his followers clustered in the doorway. His broad, flat face was swart, his eyes were like coals, and his tongue was red. He wielded a great spear. With a thrust of his huge hide shield, he turned Boromir's sword and bore him backwards, throwing him to the ground. Diving under Aragorn's blow with the speed of a striking snake, he charged into the company and thrust with his spear straight at Frodo. The blow caught him on the right side, and Frodo was hurled against the wall and pinned. Sam, with a cry, hacked at the spear shaft, and it broke. But even as the orc flung down the truncheon and swept out his scimitar, Andúril came down upon his helm. There was a flash like flame, and the helm burst asunder. The orc fell with cloven head. His followers fled howling as Boromir and Aragorn sprung at them. Doom, doom, went the drums in the deep. The great voice rolled out again. "Now!" shouted Gandalf. "Now is the last chance! Run for it!"